Well, I must say you're a very amazingly good group about reconvening, because I've very rarely ever seen anything like this where people all come back and sit down quietly and do it right, you know. Usually you have to kind of blow a whistle or something.
Can we do a go-round so everybody knows?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, that'd be great.
Because I know more or less everybody's names, but nobody else.
And then you'll be tested afterwards, and you have to
As a senior, I'm probably the most senior person here. So
Okay, well, I'm Francis. We'll start there. And then can we go
I'm
around?
Julia. I'm Stephanie. Hi.
You might just say where you're from, because I'm kind of interested in that. Where you're from now, not where you're from like 30 years ago.
From Miami.
From Miami, okay.
South Miami.
Oh, Sheila, Palm Beach.
Alejandro from Lauderdale.
Ray, Hollywood.
Dolores, Miami.
Julie, Miami.
I'm Patrick, and I live in Aventura.
Janet from Georgia.
Janet from Georgia.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm Ben. I'm
Where
from
did you say?
Vero Beach.
Georgia.
What's it, what again?
Sorry, I'm Ben. I'm from Vero Beach, Florida.
Vero.
My dad was Ben.
Charlie from Naples, Florida.
Gail, Naples, Florida.
Mark, Ithaca, New York.
Shirley, Miami.
Gloria, Miami. Diane, Miami Shores.
Carlos, Aventura.
My name's Elisa, and I live in Hollywood.
Steve from Dallas, Texas.
Donna from Dallas.
And I'm Carol from here, Miami.
From literally here.
Little here. We're all.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just do a little bit of the, what could be called centering prayer. Let's just call it a contemplative practice of being for today, okay? Because we're not going to, at the beginning, we're not going to make it into a God thing. We're not going to be thinking about God. No concepts of God. The reality we're dealing with is, in my opinion, God, but we don't need to think of it like that. We don't need to kind of put that overlay on it. Because a lot of people, like I say, they have a lot of baggage with that word God. And that conjures up so many things for so many people that are just absolutely varied. And believe me, as a chaplain, I was a chaplain in a hospital and a hospice, so believe me, that's true. Because I dealt with people all the time that carried so much stuff with God. Often I would be talking to a person, I'd go into the room, introduce myself. It was pretty obvious with me because I had a Roman collar on, so you go in with a collar. People automatically know you're the chaplain. That has its advantages and disadvantages sometimes. But a lot of times people would say to me, one guy I remember said to me, he said, well, I can see you're the chaplain. And he said, so even though you introduced yourself to me, and I'm glad that you came, I appreciate your coming, but I don't believe in God. So you can just turn around and go back out because I don't believe in God at all. And I said, well, if you have a few minutes, I would really, and this is just honest question, I would like to really hear about this God that you don't believe in. I'd really like to hear a description of it and see and let you know if I believe in that God or not. I might not believe in that God either. You know? So, and always, nobody ever gave me a description of the God that they don't believe in that I believed in. Never. I mean, when they describe this sense of God they had from childhood or something that was like beat into them, sometimes literally beat into them, and they describe this to me, and I'd say, well, I guess we'll be atheists together, because I don't believe in that God either at all. So I agree with you. You're absolutely right. There's no God like that around, hopefully, because if there was, we'd all be in a lot of trouble, you know, because usually it was pretty horrible, this God that they would describe, you know, very mean, and not anybody I'd certainly want to spend eternity with, I'll tell you. So anyway, we all have our stuff, our God stuff. And it can be even positive. You know, for me growing up, a lot of my God stuff was very positive. But when we're on this level of contemplative prayer, or contemplative practice, let's just call it, maybe take the prayer word out of it too, because that immediately goes to the God thing. When we just do contemplative practice, we're talking about, in the deepest sort of expressions of contemplative prayer, there's absolutely no conceptual framework of God in there. You know, in the highest forms of contemplative prayer that are described by the great Christian mystics like John of the Cross and Meister Eckhart and people like that, there's very little conceptual framework. There's a kind of sense of love, of a gazing, a silent gazing of love and contemplation, but not a big, heavy theology, usually. That's assumed in those people. They have a theology, but they're not, when they come to that experience of contemplation, that's not the central piece at all. What are you going to ask?
Yeah, I just want to ask if that's what it was, Quietism?
Quietism is that you're getting into another kind of topic, but that was condemned by the church as a heresy. The main thing about Quietism that was condemned was it was encouraging people to be in extremely passive states, and it completely repudiated the concept of free will. So it wasn't the quiet part of it that was the problem. It was called Quietism, but it wasn't the quiet part, because there was always contemplative practice in in Orthodox Christian circles that were accepted by the church, that were certainly quiet. And St. Teresa of Avila talks about the prayer of quiet, and quiet was a part of every monk monastic kind of lifestyle that was always accepted by the church. But the Quietist movement was, and it's interesting because there's a lot of stuff in like the Neo-Advaita scene that parallels a lot of Quietism, which is the idea that there's nothing you can do, there's no practice you can do that helps you kind of get to this point, so you just kind of sit back and be passive and wait for it to hit you over the head, or fall on you like a ton of bricks or something. But it's, there's nothing you can do at all, and there's no one to do it. So long before there's any kind of direct experience of no self, some people are kind of using this idea that there's no one here to justify all kinds of things, or to justify just sitting on your hands and not doing anything in the spiritual journey. And as I said last night, there are a few lucky boogers in the world that have gotten $75 million by winning the lottery. But the vast majority of people in the world that have $75 million did not just go out and buy a lottery ticket and get $75 million. That can happen. I would never say it can't ever happen, but it's not the normal way people get $75 million. And there are some people that walk out their door one fine day and they're enlightened. Ramana Maharshi was an example of somebody who didn't do a lot of practice in this lifetime, at least as far as we know. He sat down and did this little thing of, if the body dies and blah, 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 this little kind of investigation, and got wonderfully and beautifully enlightened and radiated this presence for the rest of his life in this absolutely powerful way that drew people from all over the world to him. But that's not the normal way. I was saying something recently on Facebook where somebody was, I was saying something like just what I just said, that most people are not going to become enlightened by just walking out their door one day and getting hit by it, like a bolt of lightning. It happens, but it's not the normal way. And then somebody said, tell that to Ramana Maharshi. And I wrote underneath it, most of us are not Ramana Maharshi. He, for whatever reason, he had the karmic constellation, the stars aligned perfectly for him, and he was enlightened at the age of 15 with virtually no spiritual practice in this lifetime. But if that's what you're hoping on, like if you're hoping to get a nice retirement by winning the lottery, well, good luck with that. As a retirement plan, good luck. Maybe it'll happen, but Mark was going to...
I was just going to say, he himself said that he had done the work in previous lives.
Oh, did he?
And he recommended that people do practice.
Oh, yeah. Sure he did.
Accumulate merit for the future realization.
Yeah, well, most of us have tons and tons of condition that cover over this innate sense of well-being and peace and beingness. The only, we all have it, it's all here, but it's unrealized in most human lives. So it's all covered over. So there's nothing to gain. That insight is true. When people say, well, you have nothing to gain, so there's nothing to do. Well, they're jumping to a conclusion there. Yeah, there's nothing to gain. If you have a diamond covered in mud in your hand, there's nothing to gain. But there's plenty to do. You got to uncover that diamond if you're going to appreciate the beauty of it. You can't just sit there with a diamond caked in mud and crud and just say, well, I've already got the diamond, so that's fine. There's nothing for me to do. You're like, okay. Knock yourself out and don't do anything. Hold the diamond in your hand, and you will never appreciate its beauty in its present state. It will never shine. It will never be really seen for the beautiful, beautiful diamond it is. And that's the same with us spiritually, you know. Yes, we have it. It's innate in us. We already have it. There's nothing to attain. But there's still some stuff to do. But lucky for us, a lot of the doing is really not a doing at all, in one sense. It's a being. Like this contemplative practice that we're about to do, I'm going to kind of help you come into this. It's not really a doing. It's a resting in being that's already there. It's a turning our attention to that, and that's the uncovering of the diamond. When we turn our attention to that, that's one way of uncovering the diamond. We'll talk about a couple other ways as the day goes on. That's one primary way of uncovering this diamond that you already have. So does that make sense in terms of, you know, people say there's nothing to do. As I said, there's a truth there in one way, that there's nothing to attain. There's a truth there. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to do. You know, it's just not automatic. And most people, the diamond is sufficiently covered over that it's going to take a little time to get that mug off. And that's what spiritual practice, working with a spiritual teacher, working in a tradition, working on a path, a spiritual path consciously, and dedicating one's life to that. That's why that's good. That's why that's important. That's why it's actually absolutely necessary for the vast majority of people, which I would assume would include all of us in this room as just a cross-section, you know. There might be one person in here who will just hear this and wake up immediately, but, you know, like I say, those are few and far between, just like $75 million lottery winners. They're few and far between. So, okay, so I think that just from the little exercises that we did this morning, you have some sense of what it means that there is this presence that's always present. Is that correct? Do most of you have a sense of what I was talking about, that there is that which is aware, that which is seeing, that which is hearing, that which is tasting, touching. When we're on our break, tasting, touching, smelling, talking, all the things we've been experiencing. And when we closed our eyes and shut our ears, it was still here, right? Didn't it leave? Did anybody leave for anybody? It's a joke. Or a token. Could at least give a token laugh. So, okay, I'm assuming that it didn't leave for anybody. It was still present when you had your eyes closed and your ears shut. So when you had these portals of sensory experience shut, closed, shut down, that which was using those to perceive, the perceiver, was still present. Interesting, huh? So now, what we're going to do is, we're going to just sit quietly, not for a long time, maybe just 15 minutes or so. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing that. And just try to rest in that, try to get that back, try to access that sense of that which is present, the perceiver, that which hears, that which sees, that which looks through your eyes, which hears through your ears, which touches through your body. You know, right now, just shut your eyes gently and try to get back to that sense that's listening to my voice right now. So I think you've all found that that's still present, isn't it? It's still here and now. Now I want you to, during this little brief time of contemplative practice, we'll call it, to just contemplate that, to just look at that. Rather than paying attention to all the sensory experiences, just turn your consciousness, that which is aware, back on awareness itself, on being itself, on presence itself. And as much as you can, just simply silently rest in that. might find that as you do that, a thought may come in of one kind or another about what we're going to have for lunch, about anything under the sun. And if that happens, which it probably will, simply let the thought be there. Don't focus on it. Don't pay attention to it. Don't engage it. But just leave it and come back to that simple sense of presence. And I want you to use one word. You're allowed one word in your mind. If any other words come in your mind, just let them go and come back to the one word that I'm going to actually give you today. And that word is being. B-E-I-N-G. Being. So if your mind starts to wander on different tracks, down different roads, let that one word be the answer to that distraction and bring back your focus to that beingness. Just come back to the word being. Don't repeat it constantly like a mantra. Just use it if you need to. If your mind wanders, use it. So that's the basic instruction. Does that seem clear to everyone? Just shake your head yes if it does. Okay, so I'm going to ring our little gong at the beginning of this meditation. I want you to just close your eyes and do this as I've instructed you. And then at the end of a brief period of doing this, I'll ring the bell again. And then we'll just reflect on that. We'll look at that experience, okay? So we can all just shut our eyes, just close our eyes gently. And then focus on this sense of being. It's always here. It's still here. Always here now. And we'll begin our little contemplative practice. If sounds come in and distract you a bit from your focus on the sense of being, and just use them to point back to that being. There's this consciousness that's aware of the sounds. That's what you're focusing on, not the sounds themselves. So just even allow the sounds to act as a word, like your little contemplative word being, and let them point you back to that sense of being that's being present to those sounds that are arising. And if thoughts come in any distraction at all, just simply repeat that word silently to yourself, being, and let it point you back to resting in that sense of presence, of being present, here and now. Various noises will arise in this sense of presence. They'll be here for a while, and then they fade away, and the presence remains. They've appeared and simply appeared and disappeared in this presence that always is here, in being. So they point themselves to being, in which they arise and in which they cease. But the being itself is silent. It's silence itself. Just allow yourself to naturally sink into this being, this silent being. was that? Okay, no one exploded. No one imploded. Which would be less messy, but probably undesirable as well. So, that's a first experience of this contemplative practice, as I'm calling it. And, you know, I think that, like I say, it's one of those things that we just as human beings don't seem to naturally tend toward. Do we? At least most of us. So when someone points it out as something we should think about doing, or actually, God forbid, asks us to do it, we might, the first experience of it in many people is boredom. You know, and when you have a room of people and you look around the room, you see people falling asleep. Because our bodies and our minds are so used to being active and seem so used to being engaged that when we shut them down like that and just focus on this sense of being, they get bored and they fall. It's like, oh, it's time to go to sleep. She's shutting down, he's shutting down. Guess that means it's time to go to bed, Betty bye. So people start nodding. And that's normal. I'm not trying to shame you or anything like that. That's just what happens. I mean, when we start doing this kind of thing, that's what is very frequently the experience of people. But I am encouraging you to sort of stick with this a bit and try it for a time. And some of you probably have meditated already, or done centering prayer of some kind of contemplative practice. So you may be more used to this, and it might not be a new experience for you, and you might be able to stay attentive when there's nothing much going on bodily or on the level of mind or intellect. But I would encourage you to investigate this, and this is what self-investigation is, because the self is essentially this consciousness, this presence. That's what it is essentially. So that's what it is in essence. You know, we add other things. We add a name and a form, and, you know, ideas and beliefs and experiences and gender and all kinds of things to our sense of self. But before any of those things can be experienced or identified with, there has to be this basic sense of sentience of those things, right? I mean, that makes sense. So that's why this is essential to who you are. It's the one unchanging element of who you are. And that's what self-investigation, or scrutiny, or sometimes called inquiry, is all about. It's inquiring into that sense of being. So, I would imagine that all of you had an experience of that just now. So, if any of you have a question or a comment or anything like that, we can explore that a bit. I think the next thing on the agenda would be lunch, right? Which would be, what time is it now?
Well, we kind of left it up to you, but I was thinking maybe 4 to 1.
What time is it now? Quarter after 12?
But we need a little break to prepare.
Get it ready, yeah. Why don't we just have a few questions now, if anybody has any, or comments, and after that we will break so that people can prepare the lunch, and then we'll have lunch. And then after lunch, I'd like to look at the other two aspects of practice. And also intersperse again some little brief periods of this contemplative practice into our day, so that we get a little taste of that, a fuller taste of that. And then hopefully, if any of you feel inspired, you might take this into your life and actually practice it in some way in your life. And these other things too. We'll be talking about the other two things. They're not two things that you can do so much today in this situation. Well, surrender, you can surrender if I'm really find me super annoying. You can surrender to that. And that'll give you a taste of surrender, so that'll be a good thing. But, so how does that sound in terms of the way the rest of the day will unfold? Okay, so any questions at all? So it's 12:15, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's just take some time for questions or comments.
So, in my meditative practice, there's that time where I get so peaceful, and it's just this side of starting to fog out into numbness and then nodding.
Mm-hmm.
From your experience, is there a way to deal with that in a more skillful way to keep you present?
Yeah, you know what I used to do when I was a monk, and that would happen, we'd get up very early. So we got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and had vigils, and then after vigils, we'd have a period where you could do contemplative practice of some kind. In the dark, usually in choir or church or in your room or something. And what I would do when I had something like that happen was, I'd simply stand up. It's very hard to fall asleep standing up. It's not impossible, it is possible, but it's less likely. So that was one way I dealt with that. You know, you can sit in a meditative posture, and sometimes people sit in like a lotus or half lotus posture, and they keep their back very straight. That can also assist you and help you. If you keep your back straight and you're sitting in a very specific posture with your hands in a particular posture or pose on your knees or in a kind of mudra like this, that kind of thing, that can help you because you're kind of consciously trying to maintain a posture. But I found one of the simplest things would be to just stand up until the drowsiness passes or whatever, and then you can sit down again if you like. But that's one very kind of practical, sort of very simple way of dealing with it. And sometimes you will fall asleep. I mean, that's just, you know, the body falls asleep. So, yeah.
Speaking only for myself, I think it would have been better if you were, you know, giving instructions before the meditation and after the meditation, but not during the meditation. Because as you meditate, you become unfocused and you kind of dissolve into the being. But as soon as there are words there, it has to come back into that concrete thing.
Well, the reason I do that is because I never know really what people's experience is. And if somebody's a seasoned meditator and has done a lot of meditation, then that's fine. They can handle just silence for even an hour, and it really doesn't cause a problem. But for people who this is new to, it does help, it seems, to have some direction and to have a few words here and there, just quietly thrown in, to kind of focus them again. But, and, you know, the problem with this is that everybody's at a different level. So we kind of have to do some things that maybe beginners would find helpful, but seasoned people wouldn't find as helpful. And then sometimes we do things that seasoned people would find helpful and beginners wouldn't. Like if we had just absolute silence for 15, 20 minutes, for some people that's going to be really a problem because they're just not used to that. So they'll just shut down and go to sleep, basically. But if you come back in every now and then, so it's a fine line, you know, and I can appreciate what you're saying, and you know, that would be true for people who have experience with this. But I don't know what the different levels are here. So that's why I do that. And I try to be a little as unobtrusive with it as I can. I don't want to. I've had some so-called guided meditations before where somebody just talked constantly, and that I think is going a little far. Yet, you know, if you're going to have a kind of guided meditation, you do need to interject here and there, kind of unobtrusively, quietly. So sorry if it distracted you, but that's my kind of rationale behind it. Yeah.
Well, I liked when you said being. I was very aware, but very drawn to travel.
Yeah.
And you brought me back to my seat. I was going into a tunnel.
Oh, when I just said being.
Being took me back to my seat. I was very aware, but I was feeling I was going to travel.
Well, that's the whole idea of using a word like that, what they call in centering prayer, a prayer word. And usually you just pick your own. You pick one that resonates with you. It could be God, it could be love, it could be peace. They recommend a one-syllable word. In the Cloud of Unknowing, he recommends a one-syllable word to take you back to that sense of presence and resting there. And that's a kind of unobtrusive little tool that you use to focus you. It's like a little sign pointing, saying, here, you know. Some people, I've heard people that use the word here for a word, or now, or being, or presence. Even you can use 2 syllables if you want. They're not that picky about it, but it's kind of better to just use one, or make a 2-syllable word into one. Presence. Presence, you know, and just let that bring you back to that sense.
In my own practice, and I do centering prayer, but my own centering prayer experience is a withdrawal from the senses. And so, and what I was having some difficulty with today is that it also includes the word carries an intention. And so, so that the absence of intention became somewhat of a distraction for me early on. So I just gave myself the intention that I would be with thee, because my intention is usually to withdraw from senses and rest in God. That's my
Well, and I don't know, maybe I didn't make it clear enough, but I am precisely recommending withdrawing from sense experience. So not focusing on sense experiences that are coming and going, but just letting them be. Now you don't clobber them over the head either. That's not withdrawal from senses. That's more violent, and that just brings a lack of peace. That just kind of stirs you up. I can't think, or I can't listen to that noise, or that kind of thing. It's just a gentle allowing and returning to that intention of being present. So there is an intention that's innate in this, but not so much, like in centering prayer, a lot of times there is sort of a God sort of focus and a context and intention of union with God or something like that. And I want to kind of avoid that right now because that's kind of more specific, and with a lot of people it can bring the drawback of conceptualizing about God, about intentions, about this, about that, and what I'm trying to do is get back to just this simple sense of resting in presence, which I think centering prayer ultimately is pointing to. But often when you do formal centering prayer, which believe me, I've done a lot of, and been indoctrinated into the technique, and I give centering prayer retreats and all that. But this is more simplified, obviously. This is not like the absolute way that centering prayer is presented normally. It's like breaking it down, boiling it down to a very, very simple, essential practice that doesn't even bring God into it so much, but just a practice of resting in being. So does that make sense?
It does. I guess what, as you were talking, I got better words. I don't know what state of consciousness I'm in when I'm meditating. So I don't know if I've fallen asleep or I've dropped down into a place where I know where I'm not conscious of the consciousness the state of consciousness that I'm in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And what you're describing basically is samadhi. It's when consciousness is simply aware of being, you could say, that's samadhi. When and when you get into a state of samadhi, it's not even a state, it's like a pre-state, you could say. It really, all consciousness of the body, of noises, of all that it drops. And then all there is consciousness aware of being. And that's a very absorbed state that can happen in centering prayer and meditation and self-inquiry and various modes of practice. And you're right, when you're in that, the reflective quality of the mind is shut down. So you can't think, there can't even be a reflection of, oh, that's neat, I'm in this place of utter stillness. That's not even possible because the mind is turned off. The mind is a tool that functions as a tool, but the mind is not who you are on the deepest level. But most of us have our minds on all the time. It's like somebody recently I was talking to and they left their computer on all the time. And I was advised by a computer person to not do that, that you're less likely to get viruses if you turn it off. Every time you use it, to just like log out of things and turn it off. But a lot of people keep it on all the time. But that's the way we are with our mind too. People just keep it on all the time. That's why we get so tired.
Yeah.
It's expensive that way.
What?
To keep your computer on open.
Is it expensive? I don't know about the expense part of it.
Yeah, you have to pay with your body. Your body doesn't rest 100%.
Right.
I was reading when it happened to people in my life with HIV, so I went to reading some books about HIV and meditation. They recommend to do meditation twice a week, at least for 20 minutes, they say, because your body doesn't rest 100% when you are awake or even when you are sleeping. So the meditation gives the full rest of your body. and help your immune system to build up.
It makes perfect sense. And another interesting thing is when a person is abiding in a sense of presence. I've talked to a lot of people, in my own experience I've had this happen, and I've talked to a lot of people who are abiding constantly in this state of presence consciously. And what happens often, and really everybody I've talked to in my own experience, is that most of the time you need a lot less sleep. So like the need to sleep like 8 or 9 hours just isn't there anymore. So then there's a lot less need to sleep. And I think the reason why is because when the mind is not being used, when you're living in this state of presence, when the mind is not necessary, it's off and you're just present. So your mind isn't constantly forming stories and interpretations and filters on reality all the time. It still functions. I'm not saying there's no filters, no interpretation, no stories, but there's a lot less. And the tendency, that it seems like the natural way of being in the world now, is to mostly be resting in this sense of being. Particularly when you're by yourself and there's no need to engage anyone else, you don't need to talk, then there's just a sense of being. Or you're walking in the park, or you're walking your dog, or you're doing something. All there is just that. You're just in that. That's described also in Zen, Satori, is just this. And that's our natural state anyway, but we usually cover it over with all this commentary. I say a lot of times it's like if you ever watch these, I used to like to, what am I going to say? Oh, my dad was a golfer, and so he liked to watch golf. So he'd watch golf on TV, and if you ever watch golf on TV, you know these commentators. Now he's walking down the green. Now he's taking out his 9-iron. Now he's taking out his putter, and he's blah, blah, blah. Now he's gesturing wildly and obscenely to the crowd, or whatever. He's like this low kind of voiced kind of commentary on everything. Well, that's the way most of us live our lives, isn't it? There's this commentator that's just always going on. Now she's wearing a dress that I don't like. Now she's talking too much. Now he's going out, now he's opening the door in a way I find very annoying. Now, blah, 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 blah. And it's usually negative. If you pay attention and listen to the little voice, it's usually a downer. It's usually criticizing something, or something's not the way you want it, or something's not the way you like, or something would be better if it was done some other, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on and on. And it's not that we should never make any suggestions or have any criticism. That's fine, we can do constructive criticism. But that little voice in the head that just goes on and on, that's what we can, when you awaken to this abiding sense of presence, that no longer is there much at all, if at all. It depends on how deep the awakening is. There's different depths of it. Did you do something?
Well, I was going to comment that I think one of the things that I particularly love about the centering prayer idea of having a word is when you're involved in life, you see your mind has gone out of this quiet beingness, even if you're not in complete awareness, and you can bring yourself back quickly with the word.
Yes, and I'm going to talk about that next after lunch. We're going to talk about surrender a bit. And that is one way of bringing a consciousness of surrender to a situation, is to use your prayer word, whatever it is, and to just quietly say it and let yourself center back into this sense of being. Because this sense of being is surrender itself. It's living surrender. It's, because it's simply present. It's not judging, it's not grabbing onto anything, it's not pushing anything away, and that is surrender. And surrender, again, it's not a doing, it's a being. So thank you for, that's really intuitive of you to say. And that's something that I actually did in my own life a lot when I was a young monk and I was doing centering prayer. And I would do that when I get into a tumultuous situation or reaction in my life or whatever. I just say my word. And it would immediately calm down everything interiorly. Especially when you get a lot of sort of practice with that word under your belt. And then the very sound of the word centers you. Just the very, even if you hear other people say it. Sometimes somebody else would say it, and it was like a little bell going off reminding me, oh, this presence, it's here right now. I'd hear my word, and it would just.
I used to use the telephone ring too. I was working in an office, and the phone would ring, and I just, before I'd answer, I'd let myself get back down.
So the phone was your little meditation bell.
Well,
Yeah.
something going on here.
Yeah.
Could you address a minute the length of time? I practiced centering prayer, and I would say 20 minutes. And of course, falling into that wonderful liminal space, I want to stay longer.
Uh-huh.
So I've started staying longer, and a priestly friend of mine cautioned me and said, oh no, you don't want to stay there too long. I mean, that's why they say 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever.
Why? What was his
What will
reason for
happen
not wanting to stay there too?
if you stay too long? And I said, well, first of all, I think that you go deeper. The possibility is
Yeah.
always to go deeper, and that's kind of what I'm longing for. And he said, well, I don't think that's helpful. And I thought, well, why not? So
Did he give you an
turns
answer?
And well, I didn't get an answer that satisfied me, because of course you got to take for hours and days and Zen practice and so forth. So just say something about the length of time, and is longer better or more, or what has been your experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that generally the perennial advice is to keep it to 20 minutes in the morning, in the evening, that kind of thing. And that's fine, but I think sort of inevitably people do begin to go deeper. They begin to access that sense of presence and consciousness and dwelling in that silence. They begin to access that more effectively and quicker. And once you access that, it is valuable, I think, to stay in that. If you feel called to do that, if you have the time to do that, if you know, it will deepen and it will bring you to a point of really understanding that you are that presence on some level, that presence is always present. And that itself is the essence of self-realization. To realize that this presence is who you are, it's always present, it's who everyone is really at the core of their being. That in itself is not all Christian theological frameworks are comfortable with that. So you might find that could be possibly a reaction against that a bit, because it's like, well, what will happen if you stay there too long?
Yeah, you go too far.
You might become a Zen person. Like
I think that's what it was about.
It could be. There are some people that feel a sense of discomfort about that, and it doesn't fit their theological framework anymore, that God is there and I'm here and never the twain shall meet. And what this is pointing to really in this practice, and really Christian contemplative people for centuries and mystics have had a direct experience of this sense of unity, oneness, reality, God, whatever you want to call it. They have had that, and they've realized that fully. And that is actually what this is pointing to. So I think you're right. I think it is a natural progression that you will want to stay in this longer and longer. And even, in fact, after I awoke to this in a very deep, sort of abiding way, the first sort of response to this new situation was that I wanted to just rest in this as much as I could without any kind of engagement with the world. So there was a tendency at that time for about 5 months or so to just sit quietly in my room and just marinate in this reality and enter into a really deep sort of samadhi state, which is when all there is then is consciousness aware of being. The Sat Chit Ananda. The Chit is aware of the Sat. In Ananda. The Chit being aware of the Sat is itself Ananda. So you could say it's like a blissful existence consciousness, just conscious of itself. And that's what the resting in that state is, and that's very valuable. And in fact, that's the direct practice that points to this realization, this awakening, this, and you could even call it enlightenment if it's deep enough.
But then, as the Franciscan Richard Rohr says, true contemplation then leads to action. In other words, it's not about running away and hiding and staying there forever.
No.
That it leads you to come back into life.
Yeah, absolutely it does.
I mean, service.
The very nature of this consciousness is that it seems to be wanting to manifest in form, and that's what action is. And that's like the whole idea of creation, of God creating you. But that's the impetus, that's the kind of trajectory of this pure consciousness, is that it tends to want to express itself somehow. But that's not something you have to be really self-conscious about. Oh, I've contemplated, now I need to go out and be active and do things and help people, and I need to do, that's okay as a beginning. But actually what happens after a sense of realization of this, of direct really knowing of this and abiding in this presence, is that then when life situations arise, as they will continue to do, and you get certain things coming before this reality of this Francis, I get people coming before, then this consciousness just responds. That just naturally, it just naturally does that. Because if we have this sense of being one with all that is, it's like if you cut your finger. If you cut your finger, what are you going to do? Ignore it? Probably not, I mean, if you're 5 and you're a little kid playing, you probably will. But if you're an adult and a kind of normal person, you cut your finger, you're going to attend to it. You're just naturally, you're not going to think, oh, how altruistic and wonderful and saintly of me. I'm attending to my cut finger. I'm just so generous, oh my God. No, you just do what you do. You cut your finger and you put some Neosporin on it, you wash it out first, and you put some Neosporin on it, and you put a Band-Aid on it, and you might, if you think it might be possible it could be infected, there was dirt in it or something, you might go to the doctor and get some antibiotic, or you might get a shot, an antibiotic shot. There's any number of things you do. You don't think it's any big deal that you do them. You just do them because that's part of your body, and that's just natural to do. And that's the same way when you realize oneness with all that is. You do what needs to be done. You don't just sit around in a cave. It's like if people are hungry and they're in front of you, you feed them. If people need clothes and they come around, you clothe them. Just like you clothe and feed your body, just naturally. And you don't pat yourself on the back for that either, or get real self-conscious about it. Oh, I'm this nice person, I feed this body. I clothe it. I make sure it's healthy, I take it to the doctor, to the dentist. Big deal. And really, it's the same with somebody like Mother Teresa, somebody like Gandhi. They're doing all this stuff in the world, reaching out, St. Francis. They didn't think they were special for doing that. They were just abiding in the sense of the Christ consciousness in themselves that saw that Christ consciousness in others and attended to it when it was appropriate and necessary and helpful. So yeah,